not power. It's apparent power. The actual power is the cosine of the angle. That's called the power factor times the apparent power. Power factor is an extremely important term. It tells you what fraction of the apparent power that goes into active power. Those are the three types of power. We calculated the current through the loads. We calculated the power factor of the source. We calculated the resistance of the loads and the inductance of the loads.
That helps, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned that we can assume that an angle is 0. Is that just for this problem, or is that generally speaking?
Just generally speaking, you can assume the phase of the source is 0. That voltage source, V sub S right there, V sub Vs equals 0.
And that means that all phase shifts are relative to the source, right?
That's right.
What did that statement just mean?
It means that all the phases of the currents are all relative to the phase of the source. All the phases of the currents are relative to the phase of the source. Any other questions? No more questions, huh?
I had a question about earlier, like at the top of this page where you're talking about impedance. So impedance is VRMS over IRMS, and it's also like out over in. So like, is that just different ways to solve impedance?
It's always voltage over current. No matter what the problem is, the impedance is phasor voltage divided by phasor current. That's the definition of impedance.
So we had never solved impedance by doing like V out over V in.
We have multiple times when we solved circuits with frequency response. We solved a bandpass filter where the frequency response was voltage that was with parallel resonance. And we also solved an RL frequency response problem where the output was the impedance. Other questions? Of the power
Mach mal ein
factor.
Cheat-Tool aus, wir wollen wieder spielen.
Q sub S is 15
Victorious,
times 10 to the third
Victorious was
power
a problem, man.
Yeah.
Ever since he
That's
came in,
the
we
power
had like long waiting to get.
of the impedance. So we're dividing by 1 over omega c squared. When you divide by 1 over omega c squared, you're multiplying by omega squared c squared. So Q sub c becomes minus V sub s RMS squared times omega c. So the capacitance C is Q sub c, which we know, divided by minus V sub s RMS squared times omega. That's minus 15.735 kilovars divided by minus 340 squared times 125. That gives 361 microfarads. So have a look and ask me any questions you like about how I found the capacitance to raise the power factor of the source to 0.9 lagging. Any questions about finding the capacitance that will raise the overall power factor to any power factor that we choose?
What are the components of QC again? The second line from the bottom. Is in the first set of parentheses and the second set. What are those equal to?
That's the current squared.
Okay.
Q sub c is I squared x. That's I squared.
So I have a question.
Yes?
You're saying that the active power absorbed by the capacitor is 0. So if
Yes.
this problem has started out saying that everything was like only using capacitance, then you would not have any P. P would just be 0.
If it only had capacitance, P would be 0.
So there wouldn't be a problem like that because you wouldn't be able to use the triangle.
There would not be a problem like that, no.
Okay.
if we wanted to reduce the power factor, would we place the capacitor in series with one of the other elements?
No, you would actually never put the capacitor in series because that would change the voltage across the loads. And the voltage is always 120 volts AC RMS value or 340 volts RMS. So to keep the voltage the same, you put the loads in parallel. If you put the capacitor in series, there would be a voltage drop across it. And the load voltage would not be a constant. On tests, very typically, I ask you to calculate the current through the source. You'll find that it's less than the current without the capacitor. You put the capacitor in and it reduces the power factor would be 1. Any other questions? Okay, well that's it for today.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. Good
Thank
question.
you.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
I have a question about some of the previous material that we've gone over.
Okay, which lectures?
We're going to go over, I believe it's frequency response.
Okay, let me pull that up. Okay, here's frequency response.
Can you go down to example 3? Could you go down a little bit more? I think there's somewhere where you have, I'm not seeing it. I think there's somewhere where you had like the resistor was like 1 over R1 plus R2. But let me see if I can find it on my computer.
Okay.
Okay, I can't find that right now, but then I had another question about when you have two sources on these types of problems, will you not have to figure out whether or not it's low pass or high pass?
You do not ever have two sources.
I'm sorry, I mean the second order, when it's second order.
When you have a second order filter,
Mm-hmm.
let me pull up a second order filter. Okay, here's a second order filter. What is your question?
Will you have to figure out whether or not this second order filter is low pass or high pass?
Yeah, but it's resonant. It is a bandpass filter. Okay, folks, that's it for today.